Good to see everyone this morning. As I said, my name is Mark Hoban and I chair the Financial Services Skills Commission. For those of you who don't know about the Skills Commission, aren't members, we are an independent body working with employers from across the financial services sector. We have over 50 members representing about 30% of the workforce. And our goal is to bring the sector together to help tackle some of the challenges around skills, particularly in the face of the degree of disruption we're seeing at the moment from technology, from demographics, from geopolitics. So that's our role, to help people reskill. And one of the things that we do is every year publish a report based on data from our members, trying to understand the skills gaps that members have, looking at where skills are in demand and the actions that firms are taking to increase the supply of those skills. So this year, our report is entitled Skills Gaps, a Moving Target. And as you read through the report, you'll get a sense of why that's such an apposite title. The report is based on data from our members and also data we collect from the ONS, as well as some of the consultancy firms that we work with, such as PwC, EY, and KPMG. So we believe that this sort of data set is probably the most representative and comprehensive insight into the skills and needs of the sector. As I said, this year's report is called Skills Gaps, a Moving Target. I think it does really encapsulate the challenges firms see. So those of you who've seen the previous versions of this report will get a sense in this one about how skills are changing. And what we're seeing is increasing demand for technical skills, driven by accelerating technological change. And a question we have in that drive for increasing skills: have we come to a tipping point? How do we seek to step up our efforts in order to close the skills gaps? And we're going to get more both on the scale of the challenge and the actions that firms can take over the course of this session. But what I'm going to do now is introduce Katharina Erhard, who has driven the skills report. Katharina's going to set out 6 of the key findings and some recommendations. We're then going to have a panel discussion. And please, if you have a question, as you go along, put it in the Q&A box on Zoom. And then when we have our panel discussion later on, we'll pick some of those questions for our team of panelists to respond to. So Katharina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to taking you all through the 6 key findings of the report after months of work with our members, with our partners, and with the team to get this out. So I'm going to start on the first slide with an overview of the labour market. What the data showed last year is that in 2025, there were fewer jobs overall in financial services, while hiring went up. And now this is not something that's unusual. I've been working in the sector for quite a number of years, and there's often been a pattern where jobs in financial services in the UK go up in one year and they go down in the next year. So we don't necessarily know what the reasons are for this change. The data doesn't tell us. It could be related to sluggish growth. It could be related to firms taking time to backfill any roles with leavers. Could be other things. But if we take a broad historic perspective, we can see that if we go back all the way to the early 1980s, jobs in UK financial services have been remarkably steady through several waves of technological change. So this is not necessarily a prediction of more of fewer jobs in the future, but we will see in next year's data. At the same time, as I mentioned, the hiring has still been quite strong, and that's particularly with firms focusing on specialist talent. So those roles that have been difficult to fill since we started collecting this data, and many of them are still difficult to fill and remain important. So there's technology-related roles, change-related roles, like software engineers, like data scientists. Cybersecurity is more important than ever. And on the other hand, we have sector-specific roles like actuaries, underwriters, pricing analysts in this year's data in particular. And this is where firms are focusing and are trying to get in the talent that they will need to prepare for the future. On the next slide, we will take a look at another type of inflow into the sector. So you might have all seen some media reports around entry-level hiring going down. And our data confirms and disconfirms this. So yes, there has been a small drop in graduate hiring, so -2%, as you can see on the right side, but this has been more than compensated by the number of people starting early career apprenticeships. So this data is really only for apprenticeships that are designed for an early career route. So it doesn't include anyone who's already in a firm and has started an apprenticeship. That's something slightly different. And if we take both of those figures together, we can see that the early careers recruitment overall actually increased by 2.5%. And what our members have told us is that they are carrying out strategic reviews of their early career recruitment. So several of them have, for example, removed the degree requirement in order to attract a broader pool of talent. And so that means if maybe the graduate pool looks like it's getting smaller, it means maybe that talent is in another bucket now. That's maybe more coming through apprenticeships, or some firms are also creating other programs. So there's quite a lot going on here. Firms also tell us about small fluctuations, business fluctuations. So those numbers will always go up and down a little bit depending on what's going on in the market and in the business. And obviously we can't exclude that any changes in the apprenticeship funding, levy funding might have influenced this as well. But I think overall our firms are all committed to securing a strong talent pipeline for the future. Now, what does this mean for skills gaps? We will see that on the next slide. So we've been collecting data about our 13 future skills, the skills in our framework. If you don't know it, I invite you to take a look at our website. And we've been collecting data for 5 years around those 13 skills. And what we have seen is that pretty much every year, and pretty much for every skill, with very few exceptions, demand has always exceeded supply. We measure that by looking at the gap between the share of firms who see the demand for any particular skill increase compared to the share of firms who see the supply also increase. And that's where we have gaps. And those gaps are illustrated on this slide. We've taken here the 5 biggest gaps in this year's data. And this is only for skills where the demand has also increased compared to last year. The biggest gap is in adaptability. One of the behaviors that's really key for the transformation, and together with teamwork and relationship management, you've kind of got that the individual level, the team level, and the client level at which the technological change is currently going on, especially with the advent of AI, is being supported and is necessary. And unsurprisingly, you can also see machine learning AI as a skill in there. It has a pretty big gap, and in terms of the demand, this was the skill that had the highest demand overall. Again, I'm sure this is pretty unsurprising. And combined with cybersecurity, this is also something that firms have flagged. They're aware of the challenges and the risks in the cyberspace and are preparing to manage that with the best technological capabilities. Many firms have told us that their skills needs overall have been affected by AI, and skills needs are changing. And I think this is what explains how, whereas last year we saw a trend towards skills gaps closing, especially for data, those gaps have now widened again. So on average, gaps are wider this year than last year. Machine learning has overtaken data as the most in-demand skill. And it shows that this is really a constant challenge for firms to manage. So skills gaps is not something that you can close once and for all, but we've really seen over the time we've collected this data, they change shape, they change direction, they close, they open again, and we really need to prepare. But how do we do that? On the next slide, we can see some data around the skills-based organization. And we have asked our members to self-assess against 3 dimensions of being skills-based. So skills forecasting, skills-based architecture, and the alignment of skills to business strategy. And what we can see is that many of our firms will rate themselves as emerging against those 3 dimensions. And the other firms will kind of go across other maturity levels. But what's really important with our skills-based organization framework, which you can find on our website, is that it provides a structure, but it allows everyone to have a different endpoint. So not everyone needs to reach the highest maturity level for any of these indicators, but everyone is on a journey. And this is what our members are telling us. If we want to close skills gaps, we need to be sure that we strengthen our skills-based foundations, that every process has skills at its heart, so we can make that tangible progress. What our surveys also told us is that smaller firms have fewer resources to invest in the technology that can help them do some of these things, but at the same time, they then benefit from a more personal understanding of their smaller colleague base. On the next slide, we will see some data about learning. So learning is really, really crucial. Obviously, that's the way we all acquire new skills. And what our data shows is that learning and upskilling activity is stable, but it might not be keeping pace with the accelerating change. Traditionally, we measure learning activity in terms of hours, and that data shows us that learning time is relatively stable at 4 days on average per person in the sector. But we're also really interested to know who are we reaching and who are we not reaching. And to do that, we have collected active learners data, and that shows that 70% of employees in the sector will proactively engage with learning. So that means over a 6-month period, they will seek out at least one bit of learning that they've not been mandated to do in order to drive their skills forward and prepare for the future. Conversely, 30% of people in the sector don't do that. So they will only do what they've been mandated to do and no more. And that does raise questions about whether they will be prepared for the future and whether they will succeed in keeping their skills relevant. On the plus side, among the majority who are engaging with learning, 22% were active in the latest month in our data, and that suggests that these people are active quite frequently, potentially even monthly, and that is great. We have a few other indicators. So we collect data on reskilling. So that's the number of people whose roles is at risk and who move into a completely different career. Those figures are stable, but they're relatively small numbers. So there's a question there. But firms have told us it's quite difficult to scale those from pilot cohorts. And there's a lot of organizational change. So many firms have kind of pivoted towards broader upskilling programs, trying to reach more people rather than having that very intense bit of learning for a small group, but really trying to draw the whole organization in. And we believe that is related to the internal mobility that we're seeing. Our data shows that more than half of all roles in the sector are filled internally, and that wouldn't be possible if people didn't have the opportunity to learn new skills, didn't seek out new opportunities and new ways to apply their skills. And with that, I will bring us to the final slide and our recommendations. Based on this data, we are unclear whether the sector's current response matches the scale of the disruption. There's clearly a lot going on in terms of change, and you might be aware we have another report looking specifically into the impact of AI and disruptive technologies, and that all that change will be evidenced and quantified, but we can see it in the backdrop of last year's data. And what we would recommend firms do going forward are 3 points. First, embedding skills across the organization is crucial if we want to understand skills gaps and get closer to closing them, even if that is an ongoing effort. And embedding a skills-based organization is one way to do that. Secondly, making space for employees to learn. This will always remain important, but we can't just rely on people's willingness, or can't just rely on informal learning to really get the scale of the upskilling we need to prepare for the future. There need to be proactive steps to really create that space. And thirdly, investing in early careers. We've seen the data currently is encouraging, but this is something we will need to maintain. We rely on new talent coming into the sector in order to build our future pipelines, the future senior pipelines, and keeping our skills current. So that's something we really should focus on, and we will continue to focus on in next year's data collection. Thank you very much. It's been great sharing the data with you, and I look forward to the panel.
Katharina, that's fantastic. Thank you very much for walking us through the findings and the 3 key recommendations. One of the ways in which the Commission works is for each major project, we have a board sponsor. I'm delighted that Liam Quinn, Senior HR Leader in the financial services sector, agreed to be the board sponsor for this project. And Liam, it'd be great to get your reflections on the report.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And thank you firstly to Katharina and the team for pulling together a fantastic report. I want to spend a little bit of time focusing on how member firms are responding to the moving skills target. But first I wanted to draw attention back to a point Katharina made there around the 30%. And this is the almost 1/3 of our workforce that isn't actively engaging within learning beyond what's mandated. And that data is not across the last week or month, it's actually across a full 6 months. And this is happening in a time where we understand that AI is truly having a disruptive impact on the workforce and on people's skills. Now, everyone on this call knows the pressure that colleagues are under, but I think it's worth just thinking about that one for a little moment. I guess the natural instinct is to treat AI as the source of this challenge. It's something that I've done myself. I've spoken to our CEO about. It's the thing that arrived and disrupted everything. But actually, I'd like to consider a slightly different frame. And it's the structural challenges we're facing right now, the gaps in capability, the limits of informal learning, reskilling programs that do not scale. These didn't start with AI. They were already there. What AI has done is simply accelerate everything. And in doing so, made visible what was already present, but perhaps easier to overlook. And the data is quite striking on this. We see huge increase in demand for things like machine learning and AI skills, but the supply increase is far too short, 28% gap in that particular skill. And you could again suggest that this is simply an AI problem. But I do think it is more structural than that. We've never really had a workforce development system that could respond at pace. So AI didn't create that limitation, it just made it impossible to ignore. And it's not just technical skills where we see the gap is widening. Adaptability, a behavior, not a technical skill, has the largest supply-demand gap that we track through the Skills Commission. It's larger than AI itself. I think that in itself is quite telling. And that number of a 47% gap is the one thing that really stuck with me when going through the reports, because it suggests the disruption isn't just about what people know, it's about whether they have the capacity to keep adapting, and what they need to know keeps changing. None of us really know what the workforce will look like in 5 years, and the report surfaces some contradictory views from firms on some of the most fundamental questions. Questions like, will data skills become less relevant as AI automates analysis? Or will growing data sets and the need for AI quality create more demand for them? Will entry roles increase or decrease? How will firms work through the junior talent pipeline to build careers of the future? And honestly, the destination is unclear and the data is a bit murky. I think we'll talk a little bit later in the panel about how we've worked through some of that. But here is what I believe is true. The people and organizations that navigate what comes next are those who have built the capacity to keep moving. Adaptability and resilience are not soft skills sitting alongside the technical agenda. They are the foundation that makes everything possible. And if people can't adapt, then the best reskilling program in the world isn't going to be a success. If leaders aren't resilient, the pace of change will erode before the strategy can take hold. This isn't a nice to have, it's a precondition of everything that we need to do. And that brings me back to the 1/3 of people. These are not just numbers, these are real people, real colleagues, people who for whatever reasons, workload, priorities, a sense that perhaps learning isn't for them, are simply not on this journey with us. And I think that's where it becomes really interesting from a professional territory. It's not our role to judge, it's trying to think about how we're engaging with them. Are we genuinely doing everything that we can as a industry, as a function, to ensure that we don't leave people behind? If this third stays disengaged when the rest of the workforce races ahead, it's not just a skills gap that we're going to have. We're going to watch our workforce split into two. And that has a huge implication for productivity, for inclusion, but also the type of organizations that we want to lead in the future. I want to be clear, though, the report is a positive representation of where our industry is responding. The data is impressive. Internal mobility holding steady with over half of the roles filled within member firms is an impressive feat to maintain. And it shows that learning activity is focusing on the right foundations, things like leadership, resilience, and adaptability. It's real progress, and that progress is hard won. But it does also trigger the question, is what we're doing sufficient for the scale of what we're facing? Not are we trying? Clearly, as an industry, we are. But is the pace and scale of our response matched to the pace and the scale of disruption? I'll close with this final view. The firms that navigate this period best won't necessarily be the ones that move fastest or launch the most programs or even have the highest learning hours per employee. They'll be the ones that were honest, earliest about what the data was telling them and about the gaps, about who was on the journey and who wasn't, and about the distance between their response and the challenge that's facing them. AI turned the lights on. What we choose to do and what we see with that, that's the work that belongs to all of us.
Liam, thank you very much. Thank you for that thoughtful and challenging reflection. And I think one of the things I think the Commission and its members does very well is hold a mirror up to itself and think through the issues that we face. And Liam's remarks there are sort of a great example of that. I'd like to also welcome to the panel, as well as Liam, Carole Roberts, who's the Director of Technology and Data at Leeds Building Society.
Morning.
And hi, Carole. And Russ Snell, who's the Talent and Skills Director at Vitality. So let me start off with Carole and Russell. So I think the report, and in fact Liam's comments, point to a very clear tipping point. You've got more demand for technology specialization, AI reshaping skills needs across all roles, and gaps that are widening rather than closing. So the question is the sector's response moving fast enough? And what does fast enough actually look in practice? Carole, I'll come to you first.
It's a really interesting question in terms of, as you say, what is fast enough? And we need to ensure we don't fall into the trap of thinking this is a race to who gets the AI medal, rather than what are the skills we need within an organisation to meet the appetite and the use of AI that fits in with that organisation strategy. And so there is definitely a danger with the emergence of AI that everybody's spending a lot of time looking sideways to see if they're going as fast as everybody else. But I guess like many capabilities, is the appetite within the organisation, how fast do we need to go? That being said, one of the things that definitely comes through the report is, yes, respond is happening, but is it proportionate enough to the speed, the scale, and I guess the complexity that's needed both in AI skills themselves, but also all of those adjacent skills that need to be there foundationally in order to then start to unlock the value. Some of the behavioural skills that have already been touched on are just as critical in terms of getting people ready and adapting to the change. One of the challenges I guess we have, and maybe not unexpectedly, is this lag between demand and supply. How soon do you train people for something when you're not yet fully sure what your AI journey is going to be? And therefore, what are you training? Are you training modelers? Are you training AI architects? Are you training people who are great prompt engineers? Actually, that piece that we're simultaneously trying to use the skills and define the strategy and get value from them is almost a perfect storm, I think, in terms of that kind of skills piece. The reality as well is that we're not stopping and doing other things right now. We're taking AI adoption on top of the other things we're already doing in organizations. And I think what we'll start to see is that kind of stone gathering moss analogy, where you get some people delivering value through AI, and that creates capacity to get some more people delivering value, and it starts to kind of accelerate. And I think some organizations are starting to get to the tipping point. So I think for me, there are things happening, and I certainly speak to peers across other organizations. Is it fast enough? It's probably more about an individual's own appetite as an organisation rather than necessarily looking across at who's winning the race.
Okay, thanks, Carole. Russ?
I really like the way that Liam framed it, that AI has turned the lights on. It didn't create the skills challenge. I think it's made visible what is already reasonably fragile, which is our ability to adapt at pace, to scale learning beyond pilots, and to bring the missing third along with us. And the real question becomes, is our response big enough for what we can see now that AI has shone a light on it? And the challenge for organizations, and the challenge that we're grappling with, and full disclosure, we haven't got this all figured out yet, but we're making good traction, is how do you make sure you've got the right skills in the right place at the right time to execute the business strategy, not only of today, but also the business strategy of tomorrow? And how do you forecast and build the pipelines to do that? And fast enough isn't about more activity, it's about faster time to skill at scale and fewer people left behind. So for me, speed is about building the foundations so the system can react. The architecture, the forecasting, the intelligence, so you can see surpluses and deficits, and then to have agile learning mechanisms within the business to spin up upskilling and reskilling in the flow of work programs that adopt that 70-20-10 model of experience, courses and education and relationships. So we know the World Economic Forum is telling us that nearly 40% of workers' core skills are going to change by 2030, and that's just around the corner. So fast enough is about a continuous capability engine rather than episodic programs. And particularly going into that specialist IT space, I think we know now that the next part for IT is not an IT transformation. It's almost another IT industrial revolution. I think that the next 12 to 18 months for the IT areas are going to be the biggest shift in everything they've done since the dawn of time. And I think that will then obviously hit all of the other areas as well. But in terms of being the center of excellence for AI, that's where the shift happens. So I think in summary, fast enough means seeing a skills gap emerging and being able to respond at scale, bringing all of the colleagues with us so we don't end up with that workforce split, as Liam talked about before.
And do you think that you talked about the challenge about pace and proportion? Are we, and Carole, you sort of touched on this about, what are we training people for? I just wonder to what extent we think businesses generally are clear about what the adoption of AI looks like in their organization. Because in a way, you have to get the strategy right about the use of AI, and then the skills should follow and inform that strategy. I wonder, and it's something that we've looked at in our work on disruptive technology. It feels we're at the early stages of knowing what the AI revolution is actually going to do to businesses. Does that resonate with what you're seeing, Russ?
It does, yeah. And I mean, we're very much grappling with this at the moment, and we're starting to make some indents in. So we have a centralized AI office that consults with different areas of the business to start to help them to articulate their AI success metrics and what some of those priorities might be. And it's at that point we can start to then get into the conversation to say, well, what's the people impact of these AI implementations? What are the chains of activity that deliver the customer outcomes in this division, in this department, in this team? Which of those activities can be picked up better by AI? And then what capacity does that release back into those teams? And what are the higher value adding activities those teams can be delivering? And what are the skills that are required for that? And if there aren't higher value adding activities, what are the adjacent skills across the business where these people are closest matched to, that we can start to create upskilling and reskilling pathways to move across? But you're right, it does start from AI strategy. But I think there's a vertical and a horizontal with this. So it's for the business unit chiefs and the organizations and the businesses to decide what's the AI priorities and strategies for our area. How does it change work? But then on the horizontal, it's about arming HR business partners and business leaders with market intelligence in what are the skills in our ontology that are most likely to be displaced first? What is the best intelligence we can get? And what are the ones that are most likely to be most in demand? And then how do you start to figure that out into your workforce planning and your reskilling? So I think it's a new field, but I think you've got that partnering with the business to go deep, but then you've got this cross-sectional piece of arming them with the intelligence to be able to start to plan and to provoke a deeper thought process around it.
Yeah, it's really helpful. Carole, you were nodding there. That clearly resonated with you.
Yeah, it really does. And I think there's a couple of builds probably. How do you set an AI strategy for something evolving at the rate and the pace that AI is from a capability, from a skills, from a tooling perspective? If we'd had a conversation about AI 3 or 4 years ago, where we thought that might have gone and what we might have used it for would probably look very different to the reality of how it's unfolded. And so from a strategic perspective, I don't think this is sit in a dark room and decide where we'll be in 5 years. This is evolving too fast kind of around us. I think the other key thing is, for me, it's about how does AI get woven through the strategy we already have as a business, and how does AI help us solve for the problems we already wish to solve for, rather than being another thing over here. And I think it was Claire from the Financial Services Skills Commission who very articulately said a few weeks ago, it's a little bit like we've all got a hammer and everything looks like a nail. But in actual fact, we need to make sure we're delivering AI where the value in doing so is. And so that strategy shouldn't be let's go and do a lot of vanity projects in and around AI, but how does it help us? And how do we weave AI through the things in the same way we've learned to do with technology roadmaps, for example, over the last few years?
Okay. And Liam, I just want to, given this pace of change, what advice do you give to people in your business about how skills need to evolve to respond to that pace of change, and perhaps potentially a mismatch between when the skills are ready and when they're needed?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and speed, key kind of tenet of the report. Trying to work through that with senior leaders is certainly interesting, because everybody wants to move at pace and we want to be moving in the right direction. But as to both Carole and Russ's points about making sure that we are aligned to strategy, that has to be the key central point to all of this activity. Just a small point back on the AI training as well. You think about how quickly AI is developing in terms of what it can do and what it can do for organizations. There is always going to be a little bit of a lag for organizations to catch up and understand how effective it can be to then train. I think most firms were in the world of prompt engineering a year ago, and now I hear a lot about citizen developed agents and people working through that. That is an entirely different skill set, and when we talk about AI as one homogenous tool, it is anything but. So it's trying to work those topics through. A lot of it still does focus around AI and automation. We talk about a lot of that internally, but making sure we're also thinking about what are the human skills, what are the relational skills that are required within the banking and financial services sector. We cannot lose sight of what makes that unique, and those human skills are the key focus of that. So it's great to see that in the report as well. Those skills being a key priority for firms, not just the technical ones that we often talk more about.
No, absolutely. Can I just pick up a finding from the report to get your views on this? So this is a question that's come in through the Q&A, and just to remind people, if they want to ask the panel a question, please drop it in the Q&A box. So this is from one of the attendees, and they say that they're interested in the fact that the machine learning AI supply bar which is green, is the highest. Is this potentially firms being overconfident in the AI knowledge and ability, or the availability of training and resources is considered higher than for other skills? So I don't know, Carole, do you want to kick off on that?
Sorry, just trying to double check a question. So I know from the report that machine learning had a 94% growth in demand, but a 66% growth in supply. I know the question is
But I think
that
the
we've
biggest growth of supplies, yeah. Are we
yes, it has
overconfident
had
in
the
what
biggest
the
growth of
skills market
supply.
looks like?
Agreed. A question
Yeah.
whether that's because there is time taken to learn and train these skills, and if we'd sat in a room 2 years ago and guessed the skills we may need in and around AI, this was probably one of the things that was always there on the list. There was always known to be a need around machine learning. Exactly to Liam's point, what we probably didn't know at that point in time is some of the things around like agentic AI development and citizen development out across teams wouldn't even probably been on most people's horizon. So I don't know whether to some extent this is because these were probably things we would always have put on the list. We needed to upskill for AI and therefore had the ability to get ahead. They're also adjacent to other skills. So in financial services, we obviously have lots of modelers, a modeling type capability, and the move between traditional modeling and machine learning isn't quite as big a leap as maybe in some other industries. So my own hypothesis, which is all it is it's probably a combination of being a relatively foretellable skill coupled with the adjacency to other underlying capabilities in organizations.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Carole. I don't know whether Russ or Liam want to come in on that.
Yeah, so I'm not a techie, so I'll put that disclaimer out there in the first place. But from a non-techie hypothesis, I mean, it's not many weeks that go by without me receiving some kind of plug for a machine learning AI related course program apprenticeship provider. So I think when people coming in and through the workforce are thinking, where do I specialize? What's AI not going to touch to the same degree? Machine learning and creating AI has got to be one of those safe bets to start to invest some time in developing. So I think there's something around it being a hot path over the last couple of years that people have probably been drawn to or pulled towards. So I think maybe that's some early green shoots of that paying off.
Okay, that's very helpful. The great marketing campaigns are out there, tapping into demand. Can I just ask Catherine to say a point of clarification someone has asked for, and that's on learning time. In the report, we say learning time is stable at 4 days on average. And the question was just 4 days per month, year, week?
Yes, I'm happy to clarify that. It's not clear on the slide, sorry. It's 4 days on average per person in the sector each year. And we say stable, it's pretty much stable. It has decreased slightly compared to last year, but it's still broadly in the same ballpark. And if you want more specificity around it, where we have seen the decrease is around mandatory learning. And that was a topic we picked up in last year's report as well, with firms deliberately trying to make learning more efficient and more time effective and reduce it to what's absolutely necessary to free up space for other learning.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. I spotted one in the Q&A box that I thought was just interesting because it builds on the importance of behaviors that you've all stressed. And I think this speaks to a demographic challenge that we face in our workforces. So the question is, if adaptability is going to be key, how do firms assess this across the workforce, given that we have more generations in work now than ever before? So I'd rather like that as a question, as I think I'm still a boomer.
I think it's again another good question. I would take it up a level just to answer in terms of how are firms assessing all skills and any skills, right? I think that is an important piece that firms are working through. You see on the key finding, maturity around some of this activity for many is still in the emerging space. So they may have their own agreed definitions of what different proficiencies look like for certain skills and trying to then work that through. How you're measuring adaptability is simply just a question of how you're measuring all skills and we're working through that. One thing that I have seen a bit of around the industry on adaptability and resilience is more and more firms thinking about mandating training in this space for this particular topic. and really thinking about psychological responses that individuals feel to help promote a better sense of resilience and adaptability. So, firms are actively trying to think about this space. As I said earlier, it becomes a key skill to help us get to our destination.
That's helpful. Thank you. Russ.
I was just going to add to that. I mean, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? 'Cause we know we're going to need more adaptability, and adaptability is a bit of an umbrella term for a number of skills and behaviors. So there's more resilience, there's change, the speed at which you can change, there's learnability to learn new skills as your role evolves or the needs of the organization change. So there are psychometrics and assessments you can use that we use at point of entry, particularly for leadership roles that can assess a person's ability to learn and ability to take on and respond. So I mean that's one method of doing this. It's imperfect, but it's a scientific input into decision making through behavioural based assessments. And then the point becomes: is there an opportunity to reflect them internally, to start to look at people inside the organisation to help them to diagnose gaps and surpluses in that skill area, and then to put together programs that can upskill people around those things. But I think part of it's around skill, part of it's a mindset and behavior, and there's a question around nature and nurture with adaptability, because constant change can be really stressful for some people who are used to routine and really thrive in that environment. There is a spectrum with this stuff. So I guess what we need to figure out is how do we create an environment that brings the best out of people all the way along that spectrum.
And do you think there's a demographic difference? Is there a generational difference around this? I've seen Carole nod there. I'm going to ask Carole that question.
I was more nodding from a different perspective. So I know there's been a lot of research into the learning styles, for example, of female and male colleagues. Women tend to lean more towards on-the-job training, for example, rather than necessarily classroom training. Arguably, some of the early AI is more classroom because the skills are not in organisations, etc. So we do know that gender in particular has historically driven people towards different preferred learning styles. And as the adoption of AI is still heavily kind of either classroom-based or online learning rather than necessarily at the desk coaching, etc., there may well be a natural kind of follow-through. So at the moment, I don't think we've seen anything to think people's preferred learning style in the AI machine learning space is any different than their default learning style. But there is perhaps a natural read across there. From an age perspective, I guess the challenge is multiple, and you touched on age from a demographic. There's a fear factor, I guess, in terms of that, that embracing and giving it a go and trial and error, etc. Is arguably, there's a higher appetite for that, arguably at the entry level, than perhaps people longer established sort of within the organisation. So again, I don't think it's age, it's more around kind of inherent behaviours and the way people been used to working in organisations. Historically, if somebody started a piece of work and it didn't make it all the way to fruition, that was often seen as failure. AI pivots that to encouraging experimentation, encouraging exploration, and it's okay to fail. We shouldn't see 100% success of our pilots in the way we maybe traditionally have. And so some of this is that mindset shift in the culture and the safe space we create around people as well.
That's really interesting, isn't it? That sense of expecting some things will fail in this experimentation phase, and then it's something that in one of the businesses I chair, something we reflect on, and about managing expectations about success rates of pilots. I want to move on to a slightly different area around active learners, because I think this is something that we're thinking about, and you've all touched on it, Liam, you mentioned in your introductory remarks, the proportion of people who haven't engaged in active learning over a 6-month period. It's a time when we know that we will all need to pick up new skills in order to thrive. I just want to sort of focus on this for a moment, and perhaps, Russ, can I just come to you at Vitality? I think your active learner rates are higher than the sector average. I just wanted if you want to share the magic at Vitality that helps you on that.
Sure, I'm not sure it's a magic, but there's definitely a formula. So I think there's 3 categories of learning as we tend to look at it. So there's push learning, which is mandated, which sits in that regulatory and compliance type of camp. There's complete self-discovery learning where people are finding their way to content that's relevant and meaningful to them. And there's a middle ground, which is almost customer-centric learning, which is where business transformation, a transformation of products and services and processes mean that we're reaching out to employees to upskill them on the new products and new processes, make sure they're equipped with everything they need for the customers. I think where we've made real traction in the last 12, 18 months is in that third category in self-discovery. And I think the unlock is about making learning truly personalized and a truly pull experience and providing people with curated courses, mentors, and gigs that are directly connected to the skills, careers, and opportunities, not just another platform full of content. So there's three things that I think have been the hallmark for our success with this. The first is that skills clarity creates shared value. So being clear on the skills you have, the skills you need to develop to perform better, or to move towards your career goals helps to create motivation and clarity for employees. So it becomes a route towards performance and progress, not a separate L&D task. And for us in the centre, it allows us to see when employees rate their own skills, it allows us to see which skills are most in demand, what do they want to develop, and which are most in deficit, where we have people that aren't at the level for their role that they should be. And that allows us to curate courses, mentors, and gigs for the skills that matter most. So rather than going scattergun, we're very precise and targeted. We follow the data to start to curate content. The second point is, I think, curation over content overload. So we work with a third-party learning content provider that has 40,000 courses and programs. We haven't turned the hosepipe integration on to fire all of that into our LMS. What we've done is we've followed the skills data to say what's the top 20 most in-demand skills at an organizational level and in each division. And then how do we curate content handpicked for each of those skills and then start to advertise that in more of a systematic and skills-led approach, following that 70-20-10 models, and not just for courses, but the same approach for skills mentors and for gigs. Which mentors do we need to seek out with which skills in order to connect them with people that want to learn? And the outcome of that becomes aligning skills to learning about role mastery and about your career goals. And the last point, one of my favourite films when I was younger was, this will show reveal my age now, Mark, which it was the Field of Dreams. And there was this expression, build it and they will come. And I'm not sure that's true when it comes to learning and skills. I think build it and some might come is probably a truer reflection of that. But there is the need to really spotlight learning opportunities and to find the most relevant, meaningful, and impactful learning for individuals and to create a moment through spotlighted campaigns, really doubling down on the why is it important for them. So a couple of ways we've done this is we've curated courses for individual divisions, and we've got the business unit chief to communicate, you've told us these are the skills you want to develop. We've partnered with the central talent and skills team to create these top 20 courses for you. So please go and take a look. You've told us you want them, so go and start to take advantage of them. And then that's on the vertical, and then on the horizontal, looking at the core transferable skills on the top of that T shape that are most important for the future, and putting together blended bite-sized programs are focused primarily around soft skills and transferable skills that are bite-sized, partly facilitated. And when we released those, we had 10% of the organisation sign up to the 3 courses that we did in 1 week. So it's just to show if you can find the right hook and the right why, I think the appetite is there.
That's super. Thank you very much, Russ. That's really helpful sort of analysis of how you've driven those numbers. Liam, how do you think about driving up the number of active learners in an organisation?
Yeah, I think very, very similar to Russ. We're thinking about it from a data perspective first. Where do we see the gaps? Where do we see the demand coming through? And again, thinking about what's in it for me. That is a question that we talk about internally quite a lot, right? What is in it for the individual? Are they really benefiting? And we talk a little bit here at the bank around building future capability, full stop. It's not just necessarily future capability for the here and now and your time at the bank. It is actually for your entire career. So we are trying to build future capability for people throughout their entire career, not just the short period that they are here at the bank. And it's then making sure that we're offering courses that are relevant, that we're working through some of that. I can see there's a question in here actually it's worth perhaps just picking up on related to this around informal learning that takes place outside of, I guess, what we even from a HR perspective are aware of. So we see people using more generative AI tools and just using AI tools to build their knowledge as well. And I think it's an important factor for us to consider. There are people actively learning that perhaps we just don't know about, right? It's not the perfect metric. We need to encourage more of that and more on-the-job learning within roles to enable people to have longer and more successful careers.
Absolutely, I think that I was going to pick up on that informal learning because this is one of the challenges about measurement, isn't it? We're all, I think, experimenting with these tools in our own time or at work, but not necessarily completing a formal course. Carole, can I just pick up a point that that you mentioned earlier that's come through in the chat around active learning, and are there the sort of DE&I implications of learning? So you talked earlier on, we were talking about demographics, about different approaches to learning for men and women. I just wonder, given that, what you think about what are the techniques that you use to help more women engage in the active learning, and are there other groups who are less willing to become involved?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. So we're very much in a shaping space, I would say, in terms of driving out our AI learning strategy. We've got some early adoption, but like many organisations, are still shaping our overall proposition. The challenge to some extent is that knowledge doesn't already exist across the business to the extent it has done historically with other skills. So the ability to set up things like buddies and learning partners to coach at desks to work through, we don't have that level of SME knowledge in AI yet. And it's how we start to get to that tipping point. One of the things that we've done a bit similar to how Russ explained is, we built champions out across each area of the business to start to develop those skills to understand what their business needs are, what are they likely to need. So one team, for example, may need much more help in the prompt space, another team more in the agentic space. But then that's what they need to know. The how they need to learn it then needs to be tailored to either the capacity, the skills, or the learning needs. And so that appetite to learn, through our learning platforms, we've been able to start to assess much better how colleagues like to engage with training. So instead of training being delivered the way we think it should be, by being able to offer out a number of different ranges, whether they're drop-in lunch and learn sessions, whether they're online interactive e-learning, whether they're classroom-based, by being able to get the data behind that learning, we can see the level of adoption, even broken down by historic skills, age, demographic, etc., be that gender, to be able to be more targeted in how we offer that out. So having the insight across that learning adoption to be able to better create future tailored learning, I think is absolutely critical. But I would argue it's always about the data.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that really sort of stands out from this conversation is actually the importance of data. And you've all three of you touched on how you use that data to drive forward the skills agenda. And I guess that's why we publish this report, because we know that trying to collect data on an industry-wide basis just helps provide a greater degree of analysis and some benchmarks that people can use. I'm so conscious we're running out of time. I've got one last quick question, and so want sort of 30 or 40 seconds from each of you on this. Early careers, key part of keeping the sector relevant and continuing the sector to grow. What do we need to do you think, to build a future-proof pipeline into the sector? So, Carole, I'll come to you first.
I'm going to answer the question slightly differently, if that's okay. I'll let Russ and Liam pick up the very entry point. I think the other thing we need to be mindful of, as well as early careers, is how we're building the skills we're going to need in the future. So an example I would give is, if we bring less data scientists, for example, into a firm, because AI is going to do a lot of the heavy lifting, how do we create the skills of tomorrow who need to monitor that the AI is creating the right outputs and creating that right capability. So, today, people who can supervise AI models are the people who were getting their hands dirty 6, 12, 18, 24 months ago. But if less people get their hands dirty, there's a pipeline there of how do you create the supervisory skills, the management skills, not to mention things like critical thinking of the future. And it would be really easy to not be purposeful enough about that and to see dilution of things like critical thinking as we evolve. So there's something at the entry point, but there's something we need to think about at every level of the organisation, how we don't see dilution or cannibalism of skills and actually leave ourselves weaker in other areas.
That's a cracking answer. Thank you. Russ.
Yeah, I mean, the data from the report tells us that the pipeline's holding, but the mix is changing. So we know that apprenticeships are up 5% and graduates are down 2%. So I think that what that signals is a shift in routes, not a retreat from the pipeline investment. Also, the bar is moving from credentials to skills and adaptability, as we talked about before. I think the one point, just building on what Carole said, is the experience gap is real, and AI can amplify it. So with uncertainty around entry level roles, and the volume of those in the future, we need to be deliberate in how we create experiences, because we know 70% of learning comes from experience. So there is the risk of where does that baseline experience and moving up through the levels come if those entry level roles disappear. And my belief is that it's through rotations and project based learning in gigs and apprenticeships, with this future generation, to give them real exposure and experience in the business.
Fantastic. Liam.
Yeah, I think two great answers, and echo those points entirely. I think the only thing I would build on is, are we doing enough in really thinking about the future shape of that workforce coming through? And the program designs need to look entirely different to what they have historically. I don't think I certainly wouldn't confess to having the answer right now, but people are starting to think about it. The path of early careers is going to look very, very different to what it has. And I think so long as we all lean into that and recognise that, then that's going to be a key action for the industry to take forward.
That's super. I think this is we could spend another hour on this topic. I think it's one of the great challenges facing the sector. I'd like to thank Liam, Carole, and Russ for their contribution and the answers they've given and the challenge they provided. I'd also like to thank Katerina, Mahima, John, and Lauren from the Skills Commission for their work on the report and putting this event together. And particularly thank all of our members who supplied data to this report, because without you, this couldn't have happened. If you've enjoyed this, do sign up for our future skills conference on the 21st of May. That's an in-person event. And if you're not a member of the commission, please come and join us. Thanks very much, everybody.